And we are live on YouTube, and I'm going to let everybody in. Good evening, everybody. This is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. We're live on YouTube. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Welcome, everybody. We're just getting started. Doors have just opened. We'll wait a few minutes to let everybody in. We're live on YouTube, and this is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. If you're looking for a menu, you've got the wrong place. We'll give it just another minute. This is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. Welcome, everybody. And I've got one more magic number to hit. It'll either be 1 minute or one more person attending. And thanks to that telephone interruption, we got the numbers we needed. So let's get started. Good evening, everybody. My name is Matt Losack. I'm co-founder and executive director of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. Let me quickly introduce my staff and board, and then we'll introduce our distinguished panelists for this evening. First off is the treasurer, Josh Fisher, who keeps track of our money and makes sure that public dollars are spent the right way. Also with us is David Mullins, our outreach director, Tim Wong, our outreach coordinator, Emily Towie, outreach coordinator, and Malek Demir, also an outreach coordinator. And all of our staff will keep track of questions and concerns, which you should put in the chat. And we will monitor that and also put up links to important information as we go. We have three distinguished guests with us this evening. First off is we have Council Member Natalie Fanny Gonzalez, who is a member of the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee and one of the champions of the recently adopted and passed renter stabilization bill, who will give us some remarks on the journey to where we are today, and today being the first day that this is law. In addition, we have Sharon Wilkinson, who is a senior staff member with the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, who will be managing the rent stabilization program for us at DHCA, and she's an expert and will be able to answer some basic questions. So we expect to have Sharon and Paulina Melvin from her department at a future Renter Town Hall to go into a much broader detail on the rent stabilization program down the road, because this is a new program. And of course, we're all going to have to get used to how it works and understand it in detail. But because the law just became effective today, we thought there might be some immediate questions, and perhaps Council Member Fanny Gonzalez might also refer to her if there's anything specific. And in addition to all of that, we have Yamil Hernandez from the Gaithersburg City Council, who has been working on advancing some renter protections in Gaithersburg. So we have a really good discussion this evening. We're very excited to have these people and privileged, of course. And so let me now turn it to our champion council member who helped get this legislation passed, Council Member Natalie Fanny Gonzalez. Natalie.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me, Matt, and everybody who has been involved. I am very excited. It took forever to get us where we are. It pretty much took more than a year, really, in terms of passing the law, and then another year to work on the regulations. And I feel very honored and empowered, really, when we passed finally the regulations yesterday. And as you mentioned, is now the law. I've been doing so many interviews, especially in Spanish, to educate the community that they have rights and that this is the law and nobody can abuse it. So I guess, I mean, I can't say, there's so much I can say here, but I will focus on the positive. It was not easy. Let's just put that aside. Any controversial issue will take a lot of work and a lot of compromise. I have thick skin, as you may know. My first job out of college was working for CASA as the lobbyist on the Maryland Dream Act, which took 10 years to pass, but we finally passed. And my job was really focused, when I was at CASA, I was focused on getting the Republicans to be on board. So I'm very familiar. I've been trained to really focus on getting those who are deniers, the naysayers, and how to move them. So that's what I know what to do. And then my background as a former planning board member, I was the vice chair of the Montgomery County Planning Board, also helped big time in getting folks at the table. I feel that we were able to pass this bill because we also have people on the county council who care about the community, and that's, at the end of the day, that's the main thing. Having people who truly care, and people who are on those positions because they want to make a difference in people's life and lift up the most vulnerable. Although that sounds like a talking point, I think when you're faced with legislation like the one that we just passed, that's when you know true colors. I'm just gonna put that out there. And I'm proud of Montgomery County because we did something remarkable for the Washington D.C. region. I'm part of the leadership for COG. COG is basically the local organization of governments, right? So think about Montgomery County, but also D.C., Arlington, Fairfax, Frederick, you name it, all the local governments. And we had a conference, a leadership conference this past weekend. I was there with Council Member Evan Glass and Rich Madalino, and everybody from all these different counties in the region were asking me about how we were able to pass this bill. And I told them, now is your turn. Montgomery County did it. Now I'm expecting Fairfax, Arlington, Prince William, to do the same thing. And I committed to send them not only the bill that they can see online and now the regulations, but also how we got there. I think when you are pushing for something like this, you gotta be very open-minded. And the last time I was here with you guys, in this type of forum, and Matt, that was like, you had me on like, I don't know, like 6 months ago. Just like long time ago, but it was earlier this year.
It's a long time ago.
Oh, all the time. I don't even remember. And I told you, what did I tell you? By the way, I never watch my interviews. Like, even when I have like radio or TV newscasts, I never watch myself just because I don't like hearing myself. So I'm just going by memory. I remember I told you, or maybe it was a phone call between you and I I told you, trust me. I'm going to get this done and it's going to be right. Just trust me. I know what I'm doing. You cannot go with putting all your cards on the table and try to pass something so controversial. You got to be very, very strategic. And that's what I did. And I am proud of that. And the calculator. When I speak, I'm very intentional. And I also understand that sometimes it's not just the message, but the messenger. And that's what I told all these elected officials over the weekend who asked me about this bill. And I said, It's about who's going to be on the bill and who's delivering which message. That's key. And so I guess that's part of the journey why I'm mentioning here. As you guys continue advocating for a similar or even more progressive, if you want to, legislation in other jurisdictions, my goal is I need to make sure that other places across the region do the same thing that we did in Montgomery County, just like we did with the minimum wage increase, right? I worked for CASA for that bill. That was like 10 years ago, guys. That was a long time ago when we passed the minimum wage increase, and it was intentional that it was Montgomery County, Prince George's, and DC. So in this case, we just passed rent stabilization in Prince George's County. They're working on the regulations, but now we gotta continue the work in other places, especially in Virginia. And it sounds like terrible, but based on my discussions over the weekend with elected officials in Virginia, people are like understanding that we're dealing with a crisis. And it's about not just talking about building more housing, which you know very well, I'm all in favor. I get excited when I see a crane in my district. I do. And I have no shame to say that. But I also making sure that we are supporting, low wage workers, people, teachers, the secretary who lives next door that should be able to work and live in the same community. That's part of really embracing our values and doing everything to accomplish that without, thinking, oh, what's my next move for my next career? I don't think in those. I didn't even want to run for office. But anyway, I'm here. Believe it or not. So anyway, it was a long journey. I'm proud of everything we did. I am proud of passing the regulations yesterday. And I am laser focused to see how the legislation the law is implemented. So Scott Bruton, he's the director of the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, is my buddy. I talk to that man more than anybody else in the executive level, and he knows that I need monthly reports and I need quarterly reports in front of the PHP committee, because if something is not working, we need to fix it right away, because we cannot fail. This law, now I keep saying bill, this law cannot fail, especially if at least my intention is to inspire so many other places across the country to do the same thing, because it's the right thing to do. Okay, it's that simple. You cannot just say we want more density. It's gonna be against. I have projects coming out. I'm not gonna release that information right now, but I have big projects coming to my district very soon. So those people who kept saying you're killing development, passing this law, you are dead wrong, and I'm gonna prove you. So I also have an attitude. Know that about me. And I don't sugarcoat. That could be great for some people and really awful for others. It's great for me. So I'm here to get it done. I'm term limited. I'm running for re-election. By the way, let me put that put it out there. And at the end of the day, we are all very easily replaceable. We are. I can die tomorrow, and somebody will easily replace me and move on. The world will move on. So the way I see life is like you're gonna use your power and make a difference now, and then after you see a challenge, then I'm now looking. Let's see what else am I gonna do? I have a few ideas already. But anyway, that was my journey. I know I talked a lot. I hope you got the point. Don't be afraid. Don't take no as excuse, and understand that if you have to be the one that is gonna go and get people punching you because you're doing certain things, but if your goal is to make the law pass or whatever, do it. That's what I did. And anyway.
So,
Matt, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, Councilmember, a couple of things.
I'm coming out of it.
Let me throw in a couple things about the journey which we've shared together. As you know, the Renters Alliance, when we came into being in 2010, that was one of the top things in our report that we urged the council and the county to do, was to pass a form of rent stabilization. So this has been a long journey since well before 2010. And more people, at one time, not this council, but when we first started, they laughed in our faces. Some of those council members who laughed in our faces are no longer council members, but they laughed in our faces and said, renters' rights will never happen in Montgomery County, that who did we think we were, that we don't pay taxes, that we're second-class citizens, and so on, all of which is not true. And now we've come along to a council that has passed a rent stabilization bill. And I think it's fair to say, and I think you will agree, that it's not everything that we wanted, that there are some things in it that we would prefer have been stronger, but there was a necessary compromise. But I did want to compliment you, especially from the hearing on Tuesday, when I think it was your voice especially that convinced the council president to move it to the Tuesday vote, to make it happen, when you said, hey, it's been long enough.
I will not comment on what happened behind the scenes after that, because what matters is that it got on the calendar and we voted for it. But yes, thank you for saying that, though. Appreciate it.
We recognize that very much, and it was very, very important to get this thing to happen.
Yeah.
We still have some work to do. I'm also, we're kind of laughing because all of our allies and friends are all claiming victory as the single most important group that got it done. And as President Kennedy once said, success has 1,000 fathers, but failure is an orphan. So we're delighted that everybody can take credit.
Hey, let them take credit. In my view, it's like, if you want to take credit, that helps the case of inspiring other jurisdictions to follow us.
Right.
So anybody who wants to take credit, even if they want to call themselves the elected official and they have no vote, do it, because we're making the case that this is popular and the right thing to do. So it's a great thing that's happening. People have no idea the behind the scenes discussions and the things that I had to deal with to get this thing passed. Remember, we're 11 council members. My goal was to get 6 votes. I ended up with 7, and I'm like, yeah. But it was a lot of compromising. As you mentioned, there were things that I wish were not there, but I had to agree in order to get it moving. And and remember, my first job at a college, as I said, I was the lobbyist for the Maryland Dream Act. The compromises that we had to make to pass that bill was a big deal. And Kim and Gustavo Torres can tell you, I was the one they sent, and I was only like 18 years old. I was the youngest registered lobbyist in Annapolis. They will send me to the Eastern Shore, Western Maryland, so I could deal with the Republicans, because the only people that they will stand was me for some weird reason, unlikable. So anyway, so I was able to get them to vote for compromise a lot, but we got to pass. And same thing apply here. It's not easy to pass policy. It's really impactful, but it's possible, and that's the goal. And we need to keep inspiring other jurisdictions to do the same thing we're doing. That's our goal now. And to make sure that we don't mess up this bill. And to make sure that Scott and all the people from the Department of Housing and Community Affairs have what they need to be successful at their jobs. Okay? So that's what's in my mind as I talk to Scott on a weekly basis, pretty much, to ensure that he has what he needs and there are not hiccups. We cannot allow any hiccups here.
Well, they don't call the legislative process the salchiche factory for nothing.
Yeah.
Ms. Wilkerson, we do have a couple of questions, and Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez, you're welcome to continue to listen in case questions come back to you. And of course, if we have any questions or concerns for Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez, please put them in the chat, and we will raise them with her. But Sharon, who is, as I say, if I got your title wrong, please correct me. But I think you're the manager of the program, or just a senior staffer, or somebody we like.
Well, I hope that you do like me, but I am the program manager, and Paulina Melvin, who was unable to make it today, is actually the manager of the entire program.
Great. So at least I know you're a manager. So couple questions. The 2-year lease option has come up quite a bit and has confused people about what it means. So you've got to rent in. So the law took place today. First of all, if you received a rent increase a month ago, but it hasn't taken effect yet, does it have to be reduced according to the formula?
Yes. Okay. So I first want to say thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be here. I do want to be able to answer your questions. As Matt already said, this is brand new legislation just passed today. So while the regulations are set in stone, there is still some areas of where we want to run certain things by the office of the county attorney, just to be sure. But as far as your first question, as far as the rent increases, if you have a rent increase, but it does not go into effect until after yesterday, like if it went into effect today or in September, that increase, if it is above this year's allowance is 6%, if it is above 6%, then your landlord would either need to amend that rent increase. And if they amend it, that will maintain that same date, or they void it and issue a new rent notice. Now, if
It's
they void it,
5.6%, isn't it, Sharon?
no. So the CPIU this year is 3.3% plus 3. So that would be 6.3%. So we're going to cap it at 6% this year.
Oh, okay, so it's not the VRGs.
No, it's not the VRG. It's a CPIU.
Okay, so that's
Yeah.
3.3%. So 3% plus 3.3% with a cap at 6 makes it
Mhm.
6%.
Correct. So
Right.
so this year's increase is 6%, and that number will be valid until June 30th, 2025. Our department will issue the new the new increase well in advance of June 30th of next year, so that there's enough time for landlords to prepare the notices and get them out within that 90-day window that's required.
Will DHCA be taking down the VRGs because there's a lot of confusion there?
No, so the VRs, I do not believe so. I believe we'll be leaving the VRGs up because not all units are under rent stabilization. They are when I come back for the next town hall, there are a couple conditions which exempt certain units or buildings from rent stabilization. So those people, we would still recommend the VRG.
The VRG, by the way, for those who don't know, is voluntary rent increase guidelines. The county posts them every February, but they were voluntary. So now we
Yes.
have another formula that makes it mandatory, but it's not the same the consumer price index that is used for the voluntary rent increase guidelines. So let's be very clear about that. I'm sure that's going to raise some confusion, as it already has. So anyway, go ahead, please, Sharon.
Okay, yeah. So thank you. So I just wanted to come today and just give a brief overview. If I may share my screen, I just have literally just 3 slides.
Let me make you a co-host.
Two slides. Honestly, it's only 2 slides.
But the other quick question was on the 2-year lease.
Mm-hmm.
If you've been, as we understand the regulations, if you're offered a 2-year lease at 5%, say, or 6%, that the 6% counts for the entire 2 years.
Yes.
But that what was not taken in for the second year increase could be banked. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you explain that for those of us who don't speak that kind of language?
No, no problem. So the banked rent is a concept where so say a landlord this year the increase is 6%. Say your landlord decided, oh, I don't want to do 6%. We'll only increase it by 3% this year. So instead, so that 3% then gets banked. So whatever that 3% of your current rent is gets put into the bank. We can call it that, like a bank. So that means that you have your lease. That now I'll be addressing like a 1-year lease for right now. So if you have your lease and then the 12 months are up, at that time, your landlord can then increase your rent that another 6%. Let's say the increase for 2025 is 6% again. And they also have the option to add on that 3% they didn't take previously. Now, so that would be a total of 9%. Now, your increase, so whatever the allowable increase is, plus whatever banked amount, is not permitted to go past 10% of your current rent. Now, in the scenario of 2-year leases, say I sign a lease this year for $2,100, and so if I sign a 2-year lease, that means I pay $2,100 until 2026. Now, the landlord is allowed to bank that 6% that he did not take for the second year of your lease. And so at the end of your 2-year lease, whether you renew or a new person moves into your unit, he'll be allowed to take that 6% increase.
Okay, so to separate two things, you can only get one increase for a 2-year lease, but
Mhm.
that the increase, even because they don't take the second year increase, because the first increase for 2 years counts for the full 2 years, they can bank what they would have raised in the second year when they offer you the renewal after the 2-year lease.
Yes.
Right. We'll come back to a more detailed discussion of these at a future town hall, but it's been coming in a lot for people. Most importantly, if your rent has not gone into effect yet, they have to adjust it to the current guidelines.
Yeah, and then another thing I wanted to point out is that landlords will have 90 days to comply with the regulations. We're giving people a grace period of 90 days, so that day is actually October 21st, 2024.
But the grace period doesn't mean that the law is not in effect today, however.
No,
Right.
however, correct. So
Right.
so everything as far like the rent increases, this 90 days mainly, I want to kind of focus on is the fees. So the last time I was here, we spoke about there are certain fees that we are regulating regulating and limiting the amount that they can increase on. And so if as we've been I'm sorry, so those fees will be limited, and there is another category of exemption. I'm sorry. There are certain fees that have exceptions where if they are optional, where if like a kind of like an opt-in service, those things would be like a pool fee, a gym fee, a pet spa fee, kind of centered around previous fees that were mandatory, that whether or not the resident used them or not. So for those fees, in order to be charged for that, the tenant actually has to opt into that service. So those fees, the opt-in fees, those are not regulated by rent stabilization. So the landlord can set those fees at their own discretion. But again, it would be your choice if you would like to utilize that service or not. They cannot create the opt-in fees for any service that's required to like things such as like ensuring unit access, maintenance, or lease compliance. So that's saying that we've seen some buildings charging what they call like a technology fee, which is essentially paying for the fob access that is the key to enter your unit. So that is no longer permitted because you can't charge someone to access their unit through the only means available. So our hope is with the fees with this regulation that we get rid of some of those junk fees that people were seeing.
I think you can share your screen now, Sharon.
Okay. I'm sorry, because I just covered everything. It was only 2 slides, so
Okay.
we've talked about it all. But I do, I plan to be back here with Paulina at our next town hall, and would love have a little bit more time on the agenda. We can go into the details and everything. And please, if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. I will we have a intake email that just went live. So if you have any questions, I'm going to put it in the chat. If you could email us there and we'll get back to you, or you can call MC311 and they can help you there or transfer you to us through there. But like I said, I will be back at the next meeting. I'm really excited to explain more. So thank you.
Great. And Councilmember Natalie Fanny Gonzalez had to hop off to her next event. We thank her very much for coming on and for giving us her view on her journey to help lead this effort. She was one of many. We, of course, want to point out Councilmember Kristen Mink, Councilmember Will Jawando, Councilmember Kate Stewart, and others who I'm sure I'm missing, but were very helpful. And council member from up in your way, David, rescue me.
Councilmember Katz voted for, if that's who you're talking about.
Councilmember Katz and Councilmember
Sales seconded the.
Thank you, Lori Ann Sales, my friend, whose name I've forgotten. I forget my sister's name, everybody. So it's a part of growing older. Okay. Any questions for Sharon that came in the chat or that we should get to now that we can do quickly before a more detailed discussion?
She answered an impressive amount of them as they were coming in, I think, and we were just telling them that. But one of them that has been here is let's say you're exempted because you're within the past 23 years, your apartment is, so it's exempted. This person is just confirming that means then none of the regulations, the fees, any of that would apply to that unit. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Let me also explain the 23-year amendment to the bill, which was a amendment that was proposed by Councilmember Don Lutke, along with the exemption for small landlords of 2 units or less. The Renters Alliance took the position, we oppose the small landlord exemption, by the way. We feel with a small landlord, a big landlord, you have the same responsibilities as a landlord for stable, affordable, quality housing. But the 23-year exemption, in principle, we support it, not the number of years, but the idea behind it, which is that if you're going to make a major investment in new housing, we think any investor in any kind of enterprise should be confident that he or she can make back their investment and a profit. And no one's going to invest in new housing if they're going to be limited in their ability to get a return on their investment. So we agree with that principle. However, we're not sure we agree with 23 years. We think that the data is pretty plain that Montgomery County certainly is a very profitable region for rental housing and the rental housing industry. And so what we wanted was something that seemed a little bit more reasonable, like 5 to 10 years, with an opportunity, if the developer or the landlord were to show that they weren't making back their return, an opportunity to extend the exemption. But 23 years seemed arbitrary and well more than perhaps what is necessary for those landlords to make developers to make back their return. So we oppose that, but we understand the principle. I hope that explains the question in the chat. By the way, not all laws are etched in only the 10 Commandments are etched in stone. Rent stabilization is not, and we might have an opportunity down the road to improve the law. But again, as Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez pointed out, it's been a long journey getting to just here, so we are appreciative of the progress. Anything else out there, gang?
Well, what you just did for that part of the law, if you want to do that with banking. Someone just said that they're still not quite clear on the banking concept. So I don't know if you or Ms. Wilkerson want to just go over that one more time, or
sure, no problem. So banking is a concept where so I guess I can explain the scenario again. And if not, then the person can reach out. I put the email in the chat, and I'll be happy to get someone on the phone to help explain it. So the rent increase is the maximum allowable increase. That does not mean that the landlord has to take the maximum every year. A landlord can choose to raise their rent at a percentage less than the maximum allowable increase. So for example, if the allowable rent increase for 2024 is 6% and my landlord decides to only raise my rent 3%, that means that there is 3% left on the table that he did not take. So that means that 3% for the year of 2000, for your lease of 2024 to 2025, that 3% gets put into a bank for the landlord. So say, I signed a lease today, say next 12 months, July 24, 2025, say I want to renew my lease. Come back, the landlord says, okay, the new rent increase for the year 2025 is also 6%. However, last year I only charge you 3%, and I bank that 3%. Now I'm going to tack that 3% on, and instead of 6% increase, you will have a 9% increase. Now, in order to mitigate that the landlord isn't banking so much rent and then whopping a big increase on one person, we have limited the increase when factoring in a banked amount to 10%. So if your landlord is implementing the allowable annual increase and banked amount, the maximum of that can only be 10% of your current rent being charged.
Understanding, of course, that even a 10% rent increase is quite the wallop, but also understand that there were folks who wanted even higher. So
Yes.
this was the compromise bill, as I say, we think that we've made progress. We're not thrilled, but we do think we've made progress. Okay. So there's work to be done down the road. What else, David?
There's been a couple of similar questions that about where tenants can find out whether their unit is going to be exempt or not, whether because of age or if there's some other kind of subsidy or what have you. The Director Bruton's been talking about probably a new public-facing portal. Will that kind of stuff be in there? And if so, when will that be available?
So we have developed a series of webinars and trainings that we're going to start scheduling, releasing a schedule for, and uploading to the website for people to listen to or to join in on to learn more about the regulations. We actually are working, we will be launching a rental housing portal. So that will actually be the site where landlords will be required to register the rent increases that they have each year. And it'll also allow tenants there will be a tenant version of the portal where they can log in and actually check the property to see if it is to check on the rent increases to make sure that they're receiving an increase that's in line with the regulations. And so the materials, our trainings and stuff will go over the exemptions. And again, if anyone has any specific questions about whether or not their unit is exempt or not, they can reach out to us. I do feel like you mentioned something about a program. So if I'm sorry, I just got distracted by the question. If your unit has a unit-based subsidy, that means it's like an AMI or an MPDU, then you are exempt from rent control. Now, if you have a tenant-based subsidy, so that's like Section 8 or Housing Choice Voucher, you are not exempt. That means your unit will fall under rent stabilization.
And also, just to remind everybody that Tacoma Park, Rockville, and Gaithersburg are independent municipalities and are not covered. The cities are not covered by Montgomery County housing law. Although we'll get to some of that later on.
Yeah, there is a couple. So thank you, Matt. So it's the city of Rockville, city of Tacoma Park, city of Gaithersburg, town of Barnesville, town of Laytonsville, Chevy Chase Village, and the town of Garrett Park. Those areas, or not sure if jurisdiction is the right word, but those areas have not adopted Chapter 29 of the county code. Therefore, they're not required to follow the rent stabilization legislation.
Do you know, Sharon?
I'm sorry.
An interesting question. Sharon, do you know how many buildings have been built, or what the percentage of units that are covered geographically by the rent stabilization law are 23 years or younger?
I do not have that data on hand. And also, my name is Sharon.
I'm sorry, Sharon.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
And well, hopefully we'll save that one for the next town hall. So people can. It's a cliffhanger.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions for our guest?
I'll just throw in this one clarifying one. That was does the fees part start immediately? Like, do all the regulations start immediately? And it sounds like the answer is yes. Like, the enforcement begins now. And I think people are asking because it's a little easier to picture how a rent increase notice, kind of resets now. If you're within the time, they'll have to maybe reissue it. But for the fees, I think it's hard for people to see how this is kind of swoop in and affect these existing fee regimes that are in place already for people that may not be allowed right now. So is that going to be mostly complaint based? Like, will people be filing? Is that how y'all will find out about that?
Yes. Yeah. So the process we have right now is that if you feel like you're having a rent increase violation or like a fee that shouldn't be charged, that they're still trying to make you pay, you would, as of right now, call 311 or email our intake, and they will, talk to you about the situation, get a little bit more information. And if it does feel like this might be a valid complaint, they will then provide you with a complaint form to fill out. And then we would go through, it would go pass on to our investigator who would go through the process.
Okay. Yeah, just a reminder, if your building was built 22 years ago, you've got 1 year of exemption. If it's built this year, you have 23 years of exemption according to the law. So hopefully that's clarified. We'll have more discussions about this with Shirin
Yes.
next time around.
Thank
So
you.
anything else quickly for our guests?
Yeah, there was one more question for Shirin. Could you just repeat the list of jurisdictions that aren't covered?
Oh, of course.
Thank you.
No problem. I have it in my notes. Okay, so it is the city of Rockville, the city of Tacoma Park, the city of Gaithersburg, the town of Barnesville, the town of Laytonsville, Chevy Chase Village specifically, and the town of Garrett Park.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Interesting about Laytonsville. We have a lot of apartment buildings up there, I think. I wonder if they're within the jurisdiction. We're gonna have to find that out for our.
Yeah,
next
so
conversation.
that's something, so there's for example, there's like Rockville, and then there's the city of Rockville. There's Tacoma Park and the city of Tacoma Park. So I would recommend double checking like the line, the map lines as far as Laytonsville goes.
Yeah, we're gonna probably put it back on Scott and your people. We're gonna need a list.
Yeah.
And people
Or
are
at
gonna
least
be
a
able
map.
to look and see if their apartment is covered or
Mhm.
not at some point.
Mhm.
But this is all new. Again, the law took place, it's been a while in development, but it is in effect today. So there's the most important thing that I think people need to know today is that if your rent increase, if you're in a covered property and your rent increase has not taken effect yet, and it's more than 6%, they're going to have to adjust it to what the law requires. So again, if you have any questions about that, you can, of course, email us always at info@rentersalliance.org. And I believe we put in Shirin's information in the chat as well. It is dhca.ors, Office of Rent Stabilization, dhca.ors.intake@montgomerycountymd.gov. So with that, thank you, Shirin, for joining us. We will see you next time. Thanks for taking time out on a short notice. We weren't sure that they were going to pass this thing yesterday, so we took advantage of the opportunity, and we thank you for being flexible.
Of course, thank you. I always enjoy the opportunity to speak with you all, and I look forward to coming back and getting into the nitty-gritty details next time.
Thank you, and we look
Everyone
forward
have
to
a great
seeing
evening.
Paulina as well.
Yes, of course. She's actually listening in, but she wasn't able. She's in transit at the moment.
Oh, and I thought not making dinner.
Yes, yes. Okay.
All right, thanks so much.
Thank you.
So that's a good segue talking about the municipalities, because with us is a Gaithersburg council member, Yamil Hernandez, who has been very curious about housing policy and how it impacts his constituents. And as I understand it, has also been working closely on developing some renter protections, expanding renter protections in Gaithersburg. David or Josh, you all are from that region. Do you want to introduce our guest?
Yeah, sure. I also want to note, Matt, that our other council member, Robert Wu, is also streaming us live, as he is in another state at the moment, but he is on the Zoom call tonight. So just wanted to make note of that. So Jamil Hernandez is first time council member, longtime resident with us, fantastic advocate for his community. David, do you want to say a little more about Jamil? Can I pass it to you, buddy?
Well, I'll just get more specific that here tonight, just not only because we had a general Gaithersburg work session, right, the mayor and council about tenant protections, but one of the featured items on the agenda related to more transparency about fees, something that Councilmember Hernandez specifically brought up. So we were looking forward to, and it looked like the council was looking to advance that. So we're excited to see that and to get more info about that and the rest of what y'all talked about.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Councilmember Jamil Hernandez of the city.
Thank you. That's
greatest city in the world, City Gaithersburg.
That's right. That's an amazing introduction. And by the way, congratulations on keeping perfectly on the agenda on time. I've never seen that ever happen before. So thank you.
They don't happen again either, so count yourself lucky.
And I was just texting David during the meeting that the Q&A is really insightful and helpful. So I hope you guys can put some of those together because there's a lot of great information, just people who are interested from your constituents and just people in general in terms of what's on the minds of folks and questions were very, very good. Again, Jamil Hernandez, freshly minted council member for Gaithersburg. In my day job, I run a life sciences company in city of Rockville. I live in Gaithersburg, where we develop medicines for humans and pets. And I'm really excited to talk to you about tenant protections, and in particular, some of the specific items that we discussed at our work session on Monday. And let me share my screen. I only have one slide. Sharing is not turned on. Let's see here. Oh, I think Shirin had it last. Let's see here. If not, I can switch to the other way if that works.
Shirin, are you still sharing, or were you?
I wasn't sharing, but I did just I just changed the settings so multiple panelists can share simultaneously.
Oh, excellent.
So
Thank you.
should be able to do it now.
works.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you. So hopefully that's showing up on the screen for everybody.
Yep.
Awesome. So yeah, so the first one, the one I'm most proud of is the fee disclosure, which what we're hoping to do, and I think we have, consensus in the council. We had an initial work session a few months ago to kind of take the temperature of folks. That got put into some draft language, and we had the work session on Monday to firm it up more. And it was this concept of, I don't like, and I'm sure everybody in this call does not like, bait and switch, where you're shown one thing and then when you go by, it's something else. So I wanted to apply that concept in not just the rents, but the fees that any prospective tenant could be charged when they're going to lease an apartment in the city. So this would be the first for Montgomery County. It's not a law in the county or other municipalities where you have prospective tenant rights and you are landlords are going to be required to post conspicuously on their website, through email, brochures, anytime they interact with you, prior to you being a tenant, prior to you putting an application or paying an application fee, you're going to have full transparency about every possible fee that is in that development and that apartment complex. And so that was the purpose of what we call the fee disclosure or fee schedule proposal. And so prospective tenants will have an avenue for redress if they're not shown those fees, a way to file complaints. The city will have new record-keeping requirements for landlords to make sure those fees are being presented and being stored for compliance. So that's the fee disclosure. It'll also be enhanced once you're applying for the lease and you're going through the rental process. It gets shown again prior to you signing that lease. So you have it with the fee, with the lease presentment. That's the current state of the art in most of the county and the other municipalities, that you get to see some of the fees at lease presentment. So we'll have that there. And obviously, during the tenancy, you have that in your contract with the landlord. The second and third item that we discussed were notices, and some of these were tying in state law and county law in terms of how do we notify tenants for access to the units, looping in some new criminal code provisions to protect tenants against harassment and surveillance or retaliation there. And then we added in, or there's draft enhancements for the minimum amount of time or maximum amount of time a landlord has to respond to city requests or city inquiries or citations, which is 48 and 72 hours. And last thing, radon. You know, for those that know, radon is a colorless, odorless gas, but as very highly carcinogenic and terrible. And when you buy and sell houses, right, part of the process of that is to get radon testing. This brings enhanced radon testing to apartment complexes, as well, apartment folks, as well as if there is a positive radon find, how to notify anybody who could be not just in the unit, but nearby units who could be affected, as well as once it's, you know, requiring abatement of it, and then continual testing on it. So I think those are the three main areas that we covered on Monday. I think we have, I'm certainly positive we have consensus on these. I think there's some tweaking on the last two provisions on what the right language to use is. I think David and Josh, who were at the hearing or listening through, heard some of that back and forth, but I think we'll find a way forward on that. In terms of timing, which is probably a question everybody is on my mind, it's coming. I think we passed the major hurdle. Now it's, you know, the public introduction and the public process to get to policy. But I think this is coming to Gaithersburg, hopefully sooner than later. And I appreciate having the opportunity to come address y'all. I'm happy to take some questions. I'll do the best that I can in answering it. And I really just want to say a shout out to, I really appreciate how the Renter Alliance folks advocate, especially in the city. It's very professional. There's great decorum and collegiality, and you advocate very zealously and well for your members, but it's appreciated. I think the tone and tenor is important. You know, we're human beings trying to learn stuff as well, and I think it does your organization a good service carrying that. So good job.
Jamil, I also
Thank
wanted
you,
to know.
Jamil. I'm going to turn it over to our outreach director, David Mullins, who's, I should point out that both Josh and David are on the Commission of Landlord and Tenant Affairs in Gaithersburg, and certainly paying close attention to this. So David, take it away.
David, David, prior to you taking it away, I also wanted to know, Jamil, that Emily Towie, also
That's
with
right.
the Renter Alliance, was in
My
the
apologies,
audience.
Emily. Yes. Thank you. I'm glad. See, Matt, it's not just you who forgets names and stuff. And Emily, I'm looking right at your picture. My apologies.
Their time will come.
Well, no, thank you for taking us through those and for the kind words about the advocacy. I mean, we appreciate while we don't always agree. I know the open door in Gaithersburg is a constant. That's the thing we've been noticing as we're advocating in other jurisdictions. For instance, it looks like, you know, Rockville, a lot of the work sessions are closed. There's these little things that are a big deal and give the space for it. And then so as long. But substantively, we do appreciate, especially your initiative with the fees there too. I had one follow-up question on that. But I did want to note that I was excited to see the notice part, and on your slide there, some of that is from the county's recent bill that Councilmember Kate Stewart introduced. I think it was 724. And at the county there, which I was really glad to see staff. I don't think at the prior work session that bill had kind of come up yet. And so it was nice to see Gaithersburg City staff on it there and bringing those to the table. And then to see that in the city, it turns out our rental licensing requirements already covered a lot of that. That was also nice to see. And it was glad to see the council went ahead and was amenable to filling that in to make it match the county law. That's great. One question about the fee, the fee schedule, or just a point of clarification. We heard earlier about opt-in fees versus required fees. It sounds to me from you that y'all are saying they should list them all up front. They're gonna show you which fees, the ones that are optional that they offer, and then also any that they would say are quote unquote required. They'd be showing you all that up front.
any and all fees. The way the language is, if it's not part of the rent, right, any fee that is charged is required to be listed.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's good news there. On the radon, it was y'all settled on parity with the county essentially, right? Was that my understanding?
Close. I think there was still some discussion as to, I think we were going maybe in my memory. I got to go back and watch the work session again. But there were some. I think we departed from the county a little bit in like above units and the notifications. I think we were going more communication. But I think the bulk of it we were going with the county, and then maybe some enhancements to it. But that's how I recall the session.
Well, and as you're kind of hinting at, still an open question since staff has gotten guidance. They're going to be coming back now to
Correct.
y'all. And so I think you mentioned it at the end there. They're coming back in a regular session then with this at some point.
I believe this is my first piece of legislation as a first-time council member. So I'm learning how the salchicha is made, Matt, in terms of the policy. I do believe the mayor controls the agenda, but I do believe the next, unless there's a lot of ambiguity, the next piece would be a formal introduction and then public process on it.
Right, and that's what's nice. So then the public would have another chance to weigh in a formal hearing setting, I imagine, down the line. But you don't have any dates for that, right? That's okay.
I don't. I want it sooner rather than later, right? I want to see this through the end and enactment of it, because I want to get better at getting legislation through, learning the process, and also measuring how its effectiveness is as you get it out there.
Jamil, I have a quick question, if I may, David, on something that came up in Kate Stewart's bill that which came from the Arrive Silver Spring fire when we were all involved in assisting the displaced tenants, and we discovered, quite to our dismay, that the landlord was charging a fee for the tenants to pay for renters insurance, but it was the landlord's renters insurance. And when the fire broke out and they realized that their insurance only covered the landlord and not the tenant's belongings, and that there was felt, even though somewhere in the fine print it seemed that in the 60-page lease or whatever they had, but that it really wasn't full disclosure to the tenants. And wondering if what you're proposing would include some kind of requirement to disclose that if you're going to offer renters insurance, that it be clear whether or not it protects the tenant's belongings as well as the landlord's.
Great question. And actually, renters insurance is something that I've been doing more research on as well, because not only the issue that you're outlining is out there, but sometimes folks don't know that the landlord is not responsible for the contents of their apartments. And it's really crucial to have your own renters insurance, which can be, reasonably affordable in terms from an annual basis. Let me double check. I believe that our current regulations require pretty specific language as to, hey, this is to protect the landlord versus this is to protect you. But I don't know it off the top of my head, Matt, but I'll definitely check on that. And if there's some clarification or enhancement, now is the time to get these comments so we can improve that. But excellent point. And I encourage everybody to look into, sometimes you can, like your car insurance company can add it on for quite affordable. And it's one of those things that, you really want to have it in case something bad happens, not just because like your apartment, but maybe the one above you flooded or something happened. You want to be protected and your stuff protected. Great question.
Yeah, the renters insurance, we certainly support the idea of renters insurance, just that some of the landlords were requiring that as part of the fees that you pay, that you're paying for renters insurance, but it was renters insurance that was the landlord's renters insurance. And it seemed like it was protecting you, but it was only protecting the landlord. And so that comes back to your notice provisions about full disclosure of what it is that you're actually signing and agreeing to, and that you understand it fully.
Yeah.
It sounded to me like I didn't hear a specific answer to it at the session, but it sounded like staff was representing that if it was in that county bill, then it probably was required of the landlord. I think the question was whether it was in chapter 13, which where most of this landlord tenant stuff is, or apparently in chapter 18 is where the licensing, a lot of this comes up at the licensure phase. I learned that from the work session in Gaithersburg. So a lot of what goes into getting a license will be some of these disclosures too. So it sounds like staff was going to come back with kind of more about chapter 18 to make sure those are all reconciled. I was going to make a quick comment on the 10% discussion going on in the chat, unless there's anything else that came up. Because I see that there. I appreciate Councilmember Wu chiming in too, because that was something we mentioned in our newsletter. It was briefly discussed there that there is a 10% recommendation, which Councilmember Wu just clarified, currently in the code. Again, not in the code where you would think. I think this was one of the reasons it came up before the council, is because it's not, you have to find it buried somewhere about in the statistical reporting parts or something, but it's a recommendation. And so yesterday at the work session, I think staff said that at the recommendation of the Commission on Landlord Tenant Affairs, they recommended that that be taken out. And I did want to make sure to just provide a little context, if it's okay. This is all public because the meeting was public. The staff came to the commission, the COLTA for short, explaining that it's very difficult to do any real advocacy or enforcement on the part of tenants with a recommended 10% cap. And they actually, explained that frustration to the commission, which landlords and tenants were all definitely sympathetic to, and then had run into, seen experience of. But then staff actually wrote down, drafted a 10% hard cap to be put in the right part of the code in place that they could actually enforce. But that, of course, it meant a lot of opposition because it would just be a hard cap that didn't previously exist. And that provision actually threatened to be a poison pill for a lot of the things that we're hearing about now that the commission did recommend, like radon testing and things. So yeah, the commission recommended helping staff out by getting rid of the ambiguous provision now, but certainly left that conversation about a hard cap open. And so I don't know if you have any further comments on that, but I just will also note that we did hear some public comment in favor of mandatory caps and a rent stabilization conversation. I don't know if you want to comment whether any of that's coming up on the agenda soon.
No, sure. I'm happy to take the question, and I anticipated a question on caps or rent control might come up, so I prepared a few slides, if I may, on that. And I think the way I came to this, right, as a new, freshly minted council member, I've noticed, there's not a lot of appetite for a hard cap or rent stabilization, rent control in the city. So I've focused my energies on what I can get done. And in the meantime, right, it's like rent burden is something that's important to people. It's affecting a lot of folks. What can we do to help? So, the city is close to 3,000 new units are in the pipeline, of which close to 1,000 are naturally affordable MPDUs or guaranteed affordable through the Casey annexation of the 500, affordable units that are going to be built. But in the meantime, as Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez mentioned, the county has passed its rent stabilization framework. So I'm a data-driven human being. In my day job, as I mentioned, we run, clinical trials where data leads us to make literal life and death decisions when we're evaluating medicines. So as I take that perspective here, I'm looking at the data that now the county is going to generate in these three main areas: supply, quality, and price. So I have a few questions for y'all, if I may, which is, I'm curious, because I've not heard from the county or other folks, and maybe you folks here have some, like, what does success or failure look like 2 years from now, 4 years from now, with the policies that have been implemented? I have a concern that 2 years from now, when folks are running for re-election, the people who oppose rent stabilization are going to cherry pick some statistics and say, see how bad it was. And the people who supported rent stabilization are going to cherry pick some statistics and see how great it was. So I think it would be helpful today, right, as in the birthday, right, the first day of these new protections coming to be, like, what are those forward-looking metrics that we should look at to be informed, to see, hey, this thing has been a great success, let's model it, or hey, it's had some failures. How do we fix it and address it? And so what sort of a few things I came up with were like on supply, like how many sketch plans, schematic development, final site plan have been filed in the city, in the county, nearby jurisdictions, how many construction permits pulled, how many actual housing units got built, what type of housing got developed, what are the occupancy rates, what are the condo conversion counts, and how do we perform relative to nearby jurisdictions that have or have not enacted rent stabilization. On quality, right? Here's some metrics about what's the number of remodeling permits issued, third-party reviews. Are people really complaining about the quality of things? Is it degrading or is it staying fine? The number of code citations and complaints by the housing authorities based on that. The community amenity degradation, right? That's happening, or improvement that could be happening. The tenant turnover rates. And then prices, right? How have they stayed over the, between rent stabilized and not rent stabilized buildings, jurisdictions, amenities? Are landlords going to start to disaggregate amenities to try to, do? So that's kind of, it's not a perfect sketch, but that's kind of the things I look for. You don't have to answer now, but if y'all can think of anything else you think I should be looking at objectively that could help inform our thinking, I'm all open to it. And I follow data and try to make the best decisions that we can, and keep an open mind and keep the conversations.
Well, I'm particularly thrilled to hear your open-mindedness about data. I wanted just a couple things, and again, down the road, we can get into more detail. But the turnover rates obviously could be drilled down into demographics a little bit more. Some folks who are well-heeled might not turn over as much as others. Different parts of the society might, people on fixed incomes, lower income families, and so on. But the other data that should be considered, you mentioned this, but we don't have to wait 4 years to see how Montgomery County goes. We can go to all the places around the country that have had long-standing rent stabilization programs and see whether or not housing has slowed, or development of housing, and for what reasons. We often hear the two canards, Minneapolis and Tacoma Park. Nobody wants to build in Tacoma Park. Well, one of the reasons why people aren't building in Tacoma Park is not because of rent stabilization. It's because there's no property to build on in Tacoma Park. Well, there's some, but there's not as much as there was in the 1950s or the 1960s. And the price of that property has gone up considerably. So the opportunity to build is a different context than it was in the past. So one has to look at that. And in Minneapolis, as often comes up, they recently passed rent stabilization a couple of years ago, and then all of the buildings stopped because they made a mistake. They did not put in, and they fixed that mistake, a exemption rate for new investment. So obviously, if you're not exempted when you're investing all your money, you're not going to invest any money. So they changed that and added an exemption so that new investment would be exempt for a while to make their return back, which of course we support. So we're eager to look into this. We are database too. I'd like to say we don't cherry pick. The other guys do, but we don't. So we actually believe that we're open-minded. I've been waiting to hear a really good argument against rent stabilization ever since we started this, and I haven't heard one yet. But if somebody has one that's data-based, as you like, council member, we're all into it.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'll just second. I appreciate you calling out the cherry picking of data, because no matter what jurisdiction, that is just something I think that is pretty rampant. And because a lot of what I hear about, some of the concerns, especially about supply, are if you dig in, are often on using the extremely kind of older generation, extremely strict rent control, as their kind of baseline. Whereas, we just heard Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez talk about, where they have what we in the chat have been talking about is an extremely generous, or perhaps overly generous exemption. Now, if we're taking in those, might look different. So this is a great conversation to continue to have. And a lot of these things, we all just need to be careful that the things that are listed here are all things, we're out here screaming about code enforcement and things already, right? We're all a lot of, right. I appreciate all that want to see, and our planning commission wants a lot of these built already, you know, before rent stabilization came in to the conversation. We just want to make sure the data is going to capture the folks that Emily and Tim know, that we have landlords trying to rush in a 50 or 70% increase, that this just swooped in and stopped. And so that as long as it captures all that, again, you're being open is really all we're looking for. And of course, being open to the public. That's the thing. If these things really need to be fleshed out, you can see, again, I appreciate you calling out the Q&A. You can see in the chat how not only just active, but extremely deeply informed these tenants are, that and our renter community here about these issues, and are ready to engage. So if there were a takeaway for me, I feel like it would be a public hearing seems pretty appropriate. But either way, however the conversations continued, that is the good news.
Excellent. Send me if you have other questions or suggestions here, please send them my way. So I'm gonna give you my contact information is here. I'm sure you guys all have it. You can share it. If you want to reach any of the mayor and council, I can represent for all my colleagues and the mayor. We read each and every email that comes in. I know I certainly do, and I welcome it in support, in opposition, educating me on an issue, whatever it may be. I think, you know, I take each of those pieces and try to learn and grow from all of them. But that's my presentation. I really appreciate the time, and I've learned a lot today on the Q&A and listening to the other folks, and look forward to continuing our discussion.
Well, we're delighted to have you. And the reverse, in addition to coming to council member meetings, we also will create meetings and do our due diligence in Gaithersburg and invite you and other council members and leaders to come to those meetings, where we'll have lots of time to get into questions and concerns with your actual constituents. So it won't be 2 minutes of testimony, but actually a conversation where people can get their teeth into it.
Excellent. Thank you all, and y'all have a great night. And
All right. Thank you, Jamil Hernandez from the Gaithersburg City Council. Thank you for joining us.
Have a good night.
All right. So let's get down to the nitty gritty. By the way, we have a few minutes left. If you have any questions or concerned about renting, an issue with your landlord, forming a tenants association, anything like that, just put it in the chat. You can always get in touch with us at info@rentersalliance.org. But we also want to make sure that the same information is always in people's heads about how to get resources. So let's start with you, Tim.
Yeah, so if you have issues with your units, with like the physical unit, like code issues, like if you have mold, or if your fridge doesn't work or it stopped running, or there's a leak, you know, if there is like if there's a plumbing issue, things like that. So we encourage people to first talk to your management, ask them to, you know, tell them about the issue, and, you know, ask for a timeline on when they'll fix it. And after a reasonable amount of time, if they haven't fixed it, you can, you know, you should make a code complaint, which Emily has linked there. And the county will connect you to an inspector, and they'll come and take a look. For people in the jurisdictions that I think they had mentioned before, the independent jurisdictions, Rockville, Tacoma Park, Gettysburg, they have their own department, so you'll have to go through them. But in a nutshell, that's what code is about. And feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, or if you want help filing a complaint. We're happy to help you do that.
The other kind of complaints that aren't related to the maintenance and condition of your home would be going to the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, also known as ALTA. These would be complaints for like ledger discrepancies, lease issues with management, things like that. It's a similar process. You're supposed to go talk to a property manager first, see if it can be resolved. You know, if you have like a money order that's not being reflected in the ledger that you know you paid, something like that, try to discuss with them first. And if you aren't able to come to a resolution, you can use the link I just put in the chat to file a complaint with Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs. And for both ALTA and code complaints, you're always welcome to reach out to us so we can kind of see the process it's going through, see if it's been resolved, or if you just need help filing it in the first place, we're happy to guide you through that.
David?
Just a note on top of that, that as we mentioned before, just like rent stabilization, the municipalities of Gaithersburg and Rockville and Tacoma Park have their own offices of landlord and tenant affairs, and also code enforcement. Tacoma and Park works with the county for that, but they all cities have. So if you need help getting in touch with them or figuring out who to call there, please again use us as a resource for that. And then on the more legal court front, kind of eviction prevention front, if you find yourself in housing court or facing notice to vacate or some other eviction related issue, there's now the Access to Counsel and Evictions program that is a statewide program that provides legal counsel for low and moderate income tenants in that situation to have representation in court. This is if you have a failure to pay rent case, a tenant holding over case. So in housing court, same day, there should be lawyers down there at the larger dockets from CASA and Legal Aid and Homeless Persons Representation Project, HPRP. Those are the three legal service providers who rotate. They have lawyers down there at the court for same day representation. It's very advisable though to reach out ahead of time as much as possible. We'll share the intake lines in a moment here for those three partners, because the sooner the lawyer and their team can look at your case, the more they can talk about possible defenses and things. There is also down at the court, if you don't run into, you need to approach these attorneys after they make an announcement if you're down there at the court. If you don't find one, on the second floor of the district court in Rockville, which is where all these cases are held currently, on the second floor, there's a walk-in self-help center where they will not take cases for representation, but lawyers will advise you, give you advice and counsel on how to represent yourself and where to look, sometimes referrals there for that. And then I did want to make one other note that I think seems related here, that if you receive a summons for failure to pay rent, there's a state law that I think Renters Alliance with partners helped advocate for that requires prior to that, but the summons can sometimes come just before the court date, day or two before we see them being delivered. You need to get what's called a notice of intent to file for summary ejectment, what we call a 10-day notice. 10 days before the landlord even files your case in court, they're supposed to be giving you this notice. I believe electronic is allowed, so it may come electronically, but probably on your door by mail, you should be getting one of this notice of intent to file. If you find yourself with a failure to pay rent case and you did not get one of those, that's certainly something to let us know about or flag for the legal counsel when you get in contact with them.
Good. And Tim, can you put the complaint link for Ulta and for Code in the chat so people can do that while Emily's searching for CASA's legal contact information?
Ulta and Code are already in there.
Ulta and Code, good. Oh, very good. Thank you, staff. I saw a question about the damage fee waiver, landlord insurance, if you can provide sufficient liability insurance. What we've been seeing is that landlords are requiring you to have renter's insurance as part of your lease. What they are, the bait and switch that we've seen is that they say, if you just pay us $10 a month for our renter's insurance, you're good to go. What they leave out or don't seem to represent clearly to the tenant is that renter's insurance is not covering your personal items. So if your lease says that you have to have renter's insurance, you should be able to decline what the landlord is offering and get your own. And that's what we would recommend that you do. Usually they're relatively affordable. They're less than $200 a month, usually about $100, $125 a month. And it protects your personal belongings in the event of fire or some other damage or theft. So do keep that in mind. Any other questions we have in the chat that we haven't addressed? All right, we have all of that information. Go ahead, David.
We had one from way earlier that said those six jurisdictions exempted from stabilization. That was like Laytonsville, Barnesville, along with Gaithersburg. Are they also exempted from the county HRC's Fair Housing Act of Chapter 29? I thought I remembered that Ms. Wilkerson saying that all of Chapter 9 didn't apply there, but I don't know the specific answer to that, to the fair housing part. I don't think she covered that, so I don't.
We'll have to leave that as a cliffhanger for the next one. But Mike, when we're talking about fair housing, there are federal laws that apply to everyone, including non-discrimination laws. If you feel that you've been discriminated against in applying for housing or purchasing a home based on race or some other protected class, that is against federal law. So, let us know and we'll try to find out for you, but we'll get that question answered next time around when Sharon comes back with Paulina Melvin from the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. Again, I want to just emphasize the rent stabilization law is now in effect today. If your rent has not gone up yet, it has to comport with what the law requires, which is 3% plus the consumer price index for urban districts, which this year is 3.3%. The law requires that it not go over 6%. That doesn't mean landlords should or have to raise it 6%. They can raise it more appropriately and more responsibly at around 2 or 3%, we think. So hopefully, if you have a good landlord, they won't profit gouge, but will simply try to keep up with legitimate expenses, which of course seems reasonable. We're around doing more than just legislative advocacy. We're also forming tenants associations, and we deal with tenants in individual disputes, guiding them to resources and giving them some information on how to address certain types of problems. So please reach out to us and we will do our best to support you. That's what we were formed to do. Excuse me. And we need you all to get in contact with us in order for us to be helpful to you. We really do want to emphasize that collective action is some of the best ways to avoid certain types of problems in apartment communities and to build community. It's not just about complaints, although we certainly want to address quality of life issues and violations of renters' rights. But we also want to see that tenants don't feel that they're isolated or second-class citizens, but that they're actually part of a neighborhood, a community. And so there's lots of ways in which you can build community by building a tenants association. And all of our terrific smiling staff here are perfectly capable of helping you form tenants associations or strengthen existing tenants associations. So please get in touch with us. We are going to be focusing in particular this year on senior communities, although we expect to hit scores of other renter communities in addition to senior communities in the next 12 months. Reach out to us. We can help. So with that, are there any other questions or concerns that I've missed or we need to address?
There was one question in the chat about banking. So someone signed a new lease that will go into effect August 1st. They only signed for the 1 year at 3% because the second year increase was 5.6%. And the question is, does that mean that the banking does not apply to their lease for 2025 to 2026?
It does apply. And the landlord who only raised it to 3%, if it's a covered property, as I understand it, has banked 3% in the first year and 0.4% in the second year. So they banked 3.4% after 2 years. So as I understand it, that means when the renewal comes at the third year, when time to renew your lease, they can raise the rent 6% plus 3.4%, so 9.4%. That doesn't mean they will, it doesn't mean they have to. It just means they are entitled to, according to this law, to take what they didn't increase and add it to the renewal.
Two things there. I think that it was the situation was so they signed a 1-year lease, and I think they signed it before the law went into effect.
But did the rent increase take effect?
It sounds like it's already in effect on. Oh no, it sounds like the 1-year lease is in effect now already. You're asking, and then are they asking about the first renewal coming up?
Oh, it sounds like they already signed their lease, but the lease start date is August 1st.
Oh,
Right. And if it's a 3%, yahoo. That's a fair rent increase. I think I said to somebody else in the chat who had a much lower offer if you have got in my view, anything less than 4%, 1, 2, or 3% is a very fair rent increase for an annual rent increase, and you should snatch it. And if it's 4, 5, or 6%, as with all rent increases, if you know your landlord or your property manager, you can always try to negotiate and see if you can get something a little bit more reasonable for your budget. But fair rent increases are always around 2 or 3% for annual. Over that, it starts to be a little bit on the profit orientation, and we don't like to see that. Again, this bill is not everything that we asked for. We wanted it capped somewhere around 3%, which seemed reasonable to us. We didn't get that. Responsible landlords, many of them testified, said we don't need this bill because we would never raise the rent that much. So we said, well, then the bill won't affect you, will it? So hopefully a responsible landlord won't be raising rents more than what's reasonable, but it is capped at 6%. If you got a rent increase that is at 7%, 8%, 9%, as we've seen across this county, double-digit rent increases. We're working with folks who got a 70 and 50% rent increase not far from here. And the senior citizens, it was outrageous. Those rents are going to have to come down to 6% because of this law. So that's really what the law will impact. Anything less than that, you're in a good shape.
Yeah, one on that note, because those of you that live in the jurisdictions that won't be covered, or in buildings that are not covered, if you receive an excessive rent increase, please still let us know. And we'd encourage you to file it with the proper authorities. I know the City of Gaithersburg staff, receives those and does respond, especially if it's to the point where it's a constructive eviction. That's people have different opinions what that means, but that's still certainly not allowed. And we recommend that you bring it to the proper authorities. And then sometimes there's appeals procedures. It was interesting to learn at the Gaithersburg work session that our landlord-tenant commission, there's been a legal opinion that says they can cap the rent case by case. Our COLTA, if someone files a complaint, staff maybe tries to negotiate, it's not satisfactory for the tenant. If that is then brought before the commission can try to negotiate or do a one-time cap there. So please still reach out to the proper authority and let us know even if this law doesn't cover the situation.
Right. It's worth a try. And of course, it's good for data collection. But what David means by constructive eviction means if they raise the rent so excessively that effectively you are being evicted because you couldn't possibly afford that kind of rent increase, it's what's known as a constructive eviction. It is an eviction, even though it doesn't actually spell that out, but it is in effect what's going to happen. So some housing authorities call that a constructive eviction, and they will enforce against the increase. So please let us know if you think you've got an excessive rent increase. And remember, you can always negotiate. And sometimes we can help you do that if you're unsuccessful on your own. So with that, I want to thank again our council member from Montgomery County, Council Member Natalie Fanny Gonzalez. I want to thank Sharin Wilkerson from the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, who will be back with us next town hall, which is August 7th, Wednesday, August 7th. And of course, Council Member Jamil Hernandez from Gaithersburg. And thanks to all of our staff and to our treasurer, Josh Fisher. This Renter Town Hall is recorded and on YouTube. If you missed anything, you can always watch it again. See you next time. Good night.